Welcome everyone, and thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Chris Zimmerman, and I'm a member of the West Chicago Environmental Commission. Before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to make a few other introductions. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, the West Chicago Environmental Commission is an all-volunteer committee that advises the City of West Chicago on environmental concerns like waste reduction and recycling, conservation, and other green issues. And we have some annual events like paper shredding in June and pumpkin recycling after Halloween and holiday lights recycling around December, January. Our members are Dan Beebe, who's our chair, John Sinowitz, Bob Blouse, Bethany Brown, and Joe Cavateo. We do have, for those who live in West Chicago, we do have a vacant seat open, so if you live in West Chicago and are concerned about environmental issues, we'd love to have you. It's not, we meet once a month, so it's not a huge commitment, and it's a good way to kind of get to know other people in town. So I wanted to acknowledge and thank Bethany from our commission. Bethany works here at Ball and arranged for our event to be held here, and she's not. She's out the door letting people. Okay, so she was the one that greeted all of you. So thank you, Bethany, and thank you to all of the other Ball staff who are helping out as well, and for allowing us to use the facility and providing refreshments. I also wanted to recognize a former member of our environmental commission, who's now a West Chicago alderman, Mike Ferguson. Mike was the first member of our environmental commission to champion environmentally responsible outdoor lighting when he was a member of the commission, so we've tried to carry on the work that he started to hopefully make some progress. I also want to introduce and thank Sustain DuPage, which is a co-host for this event. Sustain DuPage was founded by and is led by Andrew Van Gorp, and has been an essential partner in providing resources and keeping us engaged and moving forward in this initiative. And so if you're not a West Chicago resident, but you would want more information about reducing light pollution in your community, I encourage you to reach out to Andrew for more resources and information. So Andrew's going to just say a few words.
And I want to take a moment right away to thank Chris for organizing this amazing event. I think we should all give her a little bit of a round of applause. They worked super hard to put this together, so I personally am thankful, and I hope I speak for all of you by saying we're super thankful that you've put so much work into this. I also want to thank you for being gracious enough to let me give a little blurb about Sustain DuPage. So Sustain DuPage is a 501c3 nonprofit. I have been volunteering with Sustain DuPage for about 5 years now, and our goal is to be building DuPage County sustainability culture. So what does that mean? We provide training and consultation for community organizing and local sustainable policy efforts. And that kind of explains how we tie in at all to tonight's event. We kind of came together and came up with an idea for a DuPage Starry Skies project. So you can see here, we folded some, we called them origami stars, and we put them on this beautiful black curtain to represent the night sky. People wrote memories of their experiences with the night sky growing up, and we were able to debut the curtain at last year's Blooming Fest. So here's our beautiful environmental commission members. And we put it into the window at Gallery 200 with a little poster educating people about 5 effects on humans and the ecosystem that light pollution has. And so we would hope that you would, if you're interested, as Chris mentioned, connect with us on our social media. We're on Twitter and Instagram, LinkedIn, Meetup, and we have a website, sustaindupage.com. And we have a clipboard. If you would like to sign up for our newsletter, we will pass that around so you can receive more information about your amazing efforts in West Chicago. All right.
Thank you, Andrew.
Of course.
Okay, And so I am pleased to introduce Drew Carhart as our speaker tonight. Drew is a board member of the Illinois Coalition for Responsible Outdoor Lighting, where he specializes in environmental issues and lighting engineering. He's an avid amateur astronomer, and he works at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. Thank you, Drew.
I have never stood between my presentation before. So it's different for me, looking back and forth. This is the topic for tonight. I was asked to talk about the issue of light pollution, and so this is my outline. I'm going to touch on what is this concept of light pollution. Why should we be concerned about it? What does good lighting look like? And how can a community address it? So, what is light pollution? You may have seen sometime or another a picture that looks like this. It is not a photograph of the United States taken on one really clear night from space. It's actually more like data. So the dark areas are where there aren't lights, and the light areas are where there are lights. This data has also been converted back again in the mid-1990s. An Italian group took this data in a digital form and created algorithms to look at that amount of light and make a relative map showing how bright it is in various areas. So in Chicagoland, it is white, surrounded by red, surrounded by orange and yellow, and going up to green and blue. This is actually data from 1994, and the first map they made of this sort. You'll note that in 1994 already, which is a while back now, it doesn't seem like long ago to me, but it's now a while back, there were some little pockets out in the western United States where there's actually natural nighttime. Everything else is being flooded by man-made light to some extent or another. And so swing back 3 decades, and this is what you get of what the sky was like in the early 1960s. Now this resonates with me because I was alive in the early 1960s. I still live in Naperville, where I lived in the early 1960s. And I learned the Milky Way from my backyard in Naperville. And a kid growing up at that address today could count the stars they can see in the sky at night on a hand or two. So I've seen that change. So I said, well, it looks right to me, because this is what I saw changing around Chicagoland. So we've got 3 decades of time here. What happened in that period? Well, what happened is our technology for outdoor lighting changed. The lights simply got much brighter. If you were around in 1960, you would have seen the lights in Chicago as mercury vapor lights. And then all got switched out to high pressure sodium lights, which are the orange lights we got very used to. High pressure sodium lights are just a lot brighter than mercury lights. If you have a 100-watt bulb of each, the high pressure sodium light is a lot brighter. And history has shown there's been some interesting studies done on looking at making light, as the humans making artificial light, going back a couple thousand years actually, for one study in England, which I thought very interesting. But just going back 800 years, and people were using like cattail rush soaked in grease to make light at night. Comparing the cost of doing that, or the candles that replaced that, or the oil lamps that replaced that, or the gas that replaced that, the costs with each technology change for making light went down. But our use of energy to make light has always gone up. Even when the new technology comes in that is more efficient, it costs less. Instead of making the same amount of light and saving money or saving energy, we just keep on making more light. So that's what happened in the 3 decades here in these pictures, is we just made a lot more light. We also, when it comes to things like street lights, we never take out old ones, we just add new ones. So it increases all the time, it never really decreases. You'll know it when you see it. We've all experienced light at night where it doesn't really belong, or where it's glaring in our eyes, or it's an annoyance rather than a benefit, or it's glaring in our windows at night. So we know light pollution, we experience it all the time. Why is it an issue of concern? Well, I can divide this into 5 basic categories. Number 1 is kind of an obvious one, it's energy waste. Anytime we have a light on, that's plugged into the grid that's using electricity, and it's running a meter somewhere or another. On the other end of the wire, we're burning coal or we're burning natural gas. This light, lighting up the environment, is all energy waste because we're not intending on lighting up someplace 5 miles west of here when we light up the parking lot here. But if the light from here goes over there, that's wasted energy. So to light up the sky over the United States to this extent takes a tremendous amount of energy. I'll get into that in a minute. So we're used to, in energy, thinking about energy, especially in the United States now, we're used to thinking about efficiency and standards, and we're used to seeing the yellow stickers on things. We're used to hearing that our cars have to meet a certain standard. The heating and cooling system for this building had to meet certain national standards for its efficiency. It can't be 10% efficient. When it comes to street lights and the rest of our outdoor lighting in this country, there are no energy standards whatsoever. There's nothing that says a street light has to be this certain level of efficiency. There's just zero, they don't exist. So this seems like an odd thing to me. My computer printer meets standards for efficiency, and it draws all of 14 watts when it's running. The 300-watt street light out in front of my house that runs every second every night does not have to meet any sort of efficiency standards. Kind of a red flag there. The last study that the Department of Energy commissioned estimated that it was 178 billion kilowatt hours of electricity consumed each year for fixed outdoor lighting, which means things on poles like streetlights and parking lot lights and things like that. It's actually not uncommon for towns to not even know how many streetlights they have in them, much less what's screwed into them and stuff. It's just kind of they're there. Anyway, it's a lot of electricity, 178 billion kilowatt hours. So that's issue number 1 is energy waste. Number 2 is safety. There's a problem that it can be assumed that because there's a light there, it's making it safer, when in reality that's not necessarily the case. So there's a street light. So since there's a street light on this street, it must be safer, right? There's a street light. It's safer than it'd be if it was dark. Well, it's kind of a glaring street light. There's this light bulb up there, and it's nighttime, and your eyes are trying to get used to the dark. So it's kind of shining in my eyes. I'm going to hold up my hand like you would hold up your hand like this and block the light. Then I take another picture. And you notice in the other picture, when you're blocking the light, there's someone standing under the light post that you couldn't see in the first picture because of the glare from the street light shining in your eyes. So there's an issue here. Is that street light really making it safer there? The person standing under the street pole, who you could still just barely see in the photograph here, can see me because the street light is lighting me up, but I can't see them because they're standing under the street light. Is this actually making the street safer? To me, this is a really valid question. How well is it doing the job that we put it out there to do? So we're used to things, we're used to being protected and being told how safe something is, like a car rating for how safe is this car going to be in an accident. So the street light, unfortunately, does not have any safety ratings on it. There's no judgment how good does this do. Does the street light light up the street? Nobody's asking this question. You're not being protected if your town goes and buys street light, that it's going to do this job of making your street safer for you. Environmental disruption. So I think most people find it really easy to picture that when you turn a meadow into a shopping mall, you're changing the environment. You're changing the natural environment quite a bit here. So Meadow Shopping Mall, big change there. We don't think, I think, as much about what happens when we take an outdoor area that has natural daytime and nighttime and light it up 24 hours. We've taken the nighttime out of that equation there for this area. In my book, that's almost as big a man-made change to the environment there as changing the meadow into a shopping mall, because being lit up all night long is certainly not natural. It's not in line with anything in the ecology of an area. We are very daytime centered. The humans are. We're diurnal, but a lot of the other living things out there don't share that with us. If you just look at animals, so 30% of all vertebrates, 60% of all invertebrates are nocturnal. The daytime, or the nighttime is their daytime. That's when they're up doing things. They're all built to work at night. Their visual systems are made to work at night. Their physiology is to sleep when it's light out and be active when it's dark out. So that includes about 90% of all amphibians, 95% of bats, 60% of all mammals. Illinois is the great flyway for the migration of birds in the spring and fall. 56% of the species that migrate through Illinois fly at night. We're not used to that because we don't see them. They're out there. But their vision at night is geared to looking at the stars and seeing things, not to be having straight lines. This doesn't even touch upon the whole day-night cycle too for every living thing, including plants. But I have lots of studies showing how much artificial light at night affects living things. Then there's number 4, is human health concerns. So we're animals too. To me, it's very interesting. I think if you took a course in human physiology, even in the 1980s or 90s, there would have been very little mention in there about photosensitivity in human beings. In the interim, just in this century, since 2000, there's been a lot of discoveries about how incredibly photosensitive we are. And it's another thing that we have a whole college course on, I'm sure, and there probably are some offerings somewhere now. But again, I have even more papers on human versus light issues than I do on animals, because we're more interesting to study, I guess, or more important or whatever. Turns out that we all have clocks inside of us, that run on a 24-hour cycle, our circadian clock. Actually, most living things on the planet have a circadian rhythm of a 24-hour cycle, unless something that lives in the deep ocean where there's no sunlight ever, or entirely underground. Our 24-hour clock runs everything in us. It affects all of our systems in our body. And our 24-hour clock is almost entirely set by the presence and absence of light, the fact that it gets light in the daytime and dark at night. So screwing up that pattern can screw up that clock, and screwing up that clock can screw up all sorts of parts of our physiology. This is something that I think we're going to be seeing more and more about. If you're around in 10 or 20 years, this will be a thing that is parked on more. Probably quite a few of you now have something on your phone or your computer that changes the screen color at nighttime to not affect your circadian rhythm as much. That's part of this. Number 5, I don't put it last because it's the least important. You can mix all these up. They're not in any precise order, but the loss of the night sky is an issue, and that's a funny thing to say in an urban area like Chicagoland. They're kind of like, well, you're in Chicagoland. You can't expect to see stars. But our kids are growing up today without seeing stars in the sky anymore. We have 80% of the people in this country can't see the Milky Way when they go outside, wherever they live. And it's a disappearing thing culturally for us. What if Shakespeare never saw the stars in the sky, or Van Gogh had never seen the stars in the sky? This is a really cultural thing for us, and it's important to me. It's an important human thing to kind of realize your place in the universe a little bit. That there's more out there than just your little world right around you here, and the stars do that. And we know that people have been staring at the sky as long as since before there were people, actually. This guy meant a lot to people 1,000 years ago and 5,000 years ago. It was the calendar and the clock and the compass. Told you what time, when it was time to migrate or when it's time to go hunting, and it was, told you which way was the way home and all of these things. So it was important to teach this guy to your children. Now we can go through our lives without even realizing there's a sky there. So the loss of the sky at night is an important thing to me, so it ends up there on the list. So there's our issues of concern, in my definition, the 5 things. Now we'll switch to what we need to do about it. So what does responsible lighting look like? Well, there's some principles, and they're really simple. I can talk about this to 5th graders, which I have, and they get it right off the bat, because it's really simple stuff. Number 1, the light levels, the amount of light you put out, should only be what you need. It shouldn't be twice what you need, or 1.5 times, or just a half. No, it should be what you need. There are no standards in the United States for how brightly a roadway should be lit, or different kinds of roadways should be lit. There is a trade organization, a lighting trade organization, that publishes recommended practices. The trouble is their recommended practices are developed by a consensus committee, not by any science, not by saying we're going to test different lighting levels and see where there's effective accident prevention or not. Their committees, basically in the past, have always come up with their recommended practices by having the committee meet and go out to the parking lot and say, do y'all think this is bright enough? And the people say, yeah, this looks good, and that's the new standard. To me, for those billions of kilowatt hours of electricity we spend every year doing this, there should be a little bit more science involved for how bright things are. We're going to go back to that same roadway. So what stands out in this picture? I took this picture at 1 in the morning, and there's no cars. I stood in the road for like 20 minutes lighting up this picture. I didn't see a single car. But we're lighting up the car as if this was we're lighting up the road like this was rush hour. To me, there's something wrong with that picture. We should look at our roadways and say how much traffic is there on this road after dark. And if it's minimal, there's not a lot of likelihood of accidents. So we don't need to add lights at all. If it's winter time and it gets dark early and at rush hour, there are 4 lanes of traffic here. It's heavy and a lot of people turning and stuff. Perhaps roadway lighting is going to make it safer. But if it was that way at 7 o'clock and at 2 in the morning it's this way, do the lights all still need to be on at full brightness at that time? A light that only runs half the night uses half the energy, and cutting your energy use in half is a substantial thing. I mean, we talk about improvements. Gosh, we got a 5% improvement in efficiency here or there. A 50% change is a lot. So the hours of activity is a real thing that we need to think more about. Now, granted, these yellow lights, these high-pressure sodium lights, they're hard to fiddle around with. They basically are either on or off, and you can't cycle them fast. If you shut them off, you gotta wait a while for it to go back on. You can't run them at partial brightness. We're changing out, for better or worse, and I'll get into better or worse, we're changing out to light-emitting diodes or LED lights in a lot of places. Those we should be able to fiddle with endlessly. Those you should be able to have the street go down to 20% brightness whenever you want to, and slowly go down through the night and come back up. Those you should be able to put on, have motion detectors that see whether there's anybody on this stretch of the road and brighten them up when you need them or whatever. They're experimenting with that in Europe and a few places. But this, have it turn on at sunset, turn off in the morning is the recipe for wasting energy. Use the most efficient fixtures available. We'll go back to this guy. I showed him earlier. So you can download this file, which is a bunch of numbers, and plug it into software that shows you where the light goes. And so I did that on this fixture. So what this is in the diagram here is a sphere. And that's a shell around this light, and it's in the middle of that. And it's divided into the zones, telling you where the light is going. So the green, where it says forward, that's the side facing the road. This is along the road, so that's forward and down. toward the road. So it says that 23.5% of the light coming out of the bulb is going down there. Then the red zone shows that 49.9% of the light coming out of the lamp goes up. It's that why the heck are we sending light up in the air thing for? This tells us how efficient this light fixture is. It's getting 25% of the light where we want it, and 2/3 of it where we, or 3/4 of it where we don't need it. So this is not an efficient way to light up the street. Unfortunately, a large number of, when it comes to municipalities especially, never even look this far into what they're buying to figure this out and see whether things are working or not. So from both the environmental impact of having this dumping light off in all the wrong directions and the energy waste point of view, this is a real loser. Again, if there were standards in this country for streetlights, they'd be like, well, I'm sorry, this is like a car that gets 4 miles per gallon and 2 miles per gallon. This is not going to fly. So, but you can still buy it today because we don't have any standards. So how can we address these things? We need to set specific goals for how we're going to do things based on a real understanding of issues, not the some fellow workers were very frustrated when we see a town or city or in a business or whatever put in new lighting to address one of these issues. It's like you're putting in new lighting, you should think about all these things and get the best package to do all of them rather than just one of them. If you don't want to light up the sky, fine, but as long as you're putting in fixtures that don't light up the sky, why don't you also look at the color of them and look at how much they shine into the neighbor's windows and how energy efficient they are. Because there's a lot of different kinds of lighting fixtures out there. You can regulate the total amounts of light that somebody can put on their property, which has turned out to be a creative way for lighting ordinances to be written, because you're not telling the car dealership where to put lights. You're just saying you own 5 acres, you get this many lumens of light that you can put out every night. If you want to put it all in your little sales lot here so it's lit up like an operating room, you can do that. If you want to spread it out across the whole area, you can do that. Any combination of that. But you have this much property, you shouldn't be dumping more than this much light out. And the question of how much you're going to be able to bring stars back to West Chicago, well, there's hope for it. I look at pictures like this, and my summary of that is that in 500 years, it won't look like that anymore. Either we'll have figured out how to do this right and not do the energy waste and the environmental damage, or we're not going to be here, so there's not going to be lights on. One or the other of those is going to happen, because this is not sustainable. This is not sensible. It's just an issue that we haven't addressed as a society. Again, when I got into working on this subject, I realized it's a lot like the state of clean air and clean water were back like in the early 1960s. I grew up by the DuPage River, and there was raw sewage floating down the DuPage River. And you could look at that and say, this doesn't seem right, but you could also look at it and say, well, it can't be too bad, or they wouldn't let it happen, and somebody must know what they're doing, and or it just has to be that way, or all those things. Well, we're doing that now with this. We're like, so somebody must know what they're doing. They wouldn't let it happen if it was that bad. It just has to be that way. Well, none of that's true. It's just that this hasn't come to the forefront in our society yet to actually be addressing it as an issue. Anyway, that's my spiel. Are there any comments, questions? Yes.
What do you think about motion censored lights? And secondly, are there any grants available from any organizations to help businesses or municipalities change their lighting?
So that's, don't let me forget the one when I answer the other. If you're concerned about the lighting you run around your residences, real downer thing, having your porch light on all night does nothing to make your house safer. There's no evidence of that. 2/3 of home burglaries happen during the daytime anyway, so night isn't the big spawning ground of crime and whatever. There's not been a single study that showed that having your backlight or your porch light on all night long does anything. Motion detector lights, on the other hand, there's a difference. There's some studies that show that for property security, that may be a definite thing, if you're actually have any threat to your property at all. For some of us, there probably really isn't that much anyway. But to me, it's a really simple principle. Nobody pays attention that your light's on all night. But if your light goes on when somebody comes on your property, they don't know if you saw them and turned on their light, or if that light going on attracted somebody's attention or something like that. So that kind of makes sense, that would be more effective. Again, it's something that's being incorporated into exterior lighting in a lot of theory ways for roadways and things too. So actually keep track of where there's enough going on to need to turn on lights or turn up lights. The grant thing, there have been grants for municipalities. I don't know if there's one currently going on. They've all been administered by the Department of Energy, and they're all entirely efficiency-based. So in the past, there have been periods where there were some grants available for municipalities to take advantage to switch out lighting, switch out the municipal run lighting. But it was just like how many watts you're going to have before and how many you're going to have after, and not is it shining in the sky or anything like that. I don't know anybody who's doing anything to do ecologically or environmentally sound work. The big part of that is that environmentally sound doesn't necessarily mean cost anymore. You can spend an awful lot on a really crappy fixture. So that one that I was lambasting there is not a cheap fixture. It's a like that's all my town can afford. You made that choice to buy that one. So anything else? Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. But if you ask any industry, would you like more regulation? I think most of them would say no. I think that's kind of the starting place. As far as where things really go wrong, again, I can talk about this all night, and I don't want to keep people. I've worked with people in industry, and basically, when you go to the manufacturing end of it, they're happy to build whatever will sell. There isn't a, no, we've always made incandescentables, we're not going to make LEDs. They're like, hey, if you're going to buy LEDs, we'll make LEDs. The sticking points in this industry of lighting things has tended to be in the middle with the people who your town goes to specify what to put in your town. They're the ones who don't want to change and who have the warehouse full of something they want to sell. And manufacturing, as I said earlier about Chicago had this wonderful opportunity to say, we've got these 5 things we're interested in our streetlights. We want them to be energy efficient, and we want to put the light in the right place and be able to vary the brightness of the day and the night and not impact the environment or shine up into the sky. They could have done that, and industry would have been clamoring, the different manufacturers would have been clamoring to design that fixture that met Chicago standards. So that's more of the manufacturing end of things, is they'll do whatever, because the companies like streetlights General Electric, Philips spent a lot of money switching over to LEDs, because that was obviously the way things were going to go. It's more the guy who specifies and tells your town, you should put in the GE 521 streetlight because it's the thing for you. That's where I've seen most things get held up, and I don't know what the vested interest is there. I don't want to learn a new thing. I got a warehouse full of these already. Whatever. So, I do think that the more places there's good lighting, the more people will experience it. I could take you on a tour of Chicagoland, show you a couple of towns that have done nice jobs in their downtowns that are very pleasant. And you could do a nighttime. Let's stand in Clarendon Hills. There's a really nicely lit downtown, and they have lights. It isn't like you can't have any lights at night, but they just, one of the lights in the good pictures with the city street with Clarendon Hills, really nice. I could take you there, and I could take you to Naperville where I live, and you can just stand there and say, wow, I really like the other one a lot better. So the more examples we have, the better. Even if they're more localized, I think it can spread from that. But we do need to make more people aware of it, but it just simply that it is an issue. again, so people were fighting over clean water and clean air in the 1950s and 60s, and they're still fighting over clean water and clean air. It's not like those things have gotten solved, but there's been some improvements along the way. So, there's hope, I think. I don't know if that answered your point at all, but I'm not a big conspiracy theory person. People want to make money today and do it the easy way. It's kind of the way capitalism works. So whatever in the gears there is holding things up. But they'll switch if there's market demand. That I'm sure of.
Woo.